In the first part of this series, we talked about the launch of the first crusade in Anatolia and its conquest of the Seljuk state of Rome, but the worst part of it has not yet appeared. These bloodthirsty crusaders did not enter the Levant. What awaits the Muslims in these countries? And what's the fate of Jerusalem? This is what we will find out today in the second part of this series. Having established themselves at Tarsus, the Crusade army took the safe route by going around the Tarsus mountains, with the exception of 2 brigades that marched through the rugged mountains and were under the command of Tancred and Baldwin. Then Tancred met with the original Crusader army, while Baldwin accepted the invitation of the Armenians in Edessa to surround the city, fearing that it would be occupied by the Seljuk emir of Mosul, and there he founded the first Crusader state, the state of Edessa. The Crusaders continued their way and reached Antioch, the last stronghold of the Turks in the region, before entering the Levant in October 1097. The approach of the Crusaders to the city caused a great panic among the population. Antioch is a historical city and one of the most fortified cities, with giant walls that iron, stone, and fire are unable to destroy. Therefore, its population withstood, and after more than 2 months of the siege, an Islamic relief force came from Damascus, commanded by the Seljuk Emir Dukak, and another force from Homs, commanded by Hussein ibn Mala'ad. The 2 Muslim armies met with the Crusader army in the south of Antioch at the end of December 1097, where a battle took place in which the Muslims had the upper hand, even though they did not achieve a decisive victory. Nevertheless, Dukak decided to withdraw and return to Damascus to secure his city, and did not try to save Antioch again. When the siege took longer than anticipated, the Crusaders despaired, and famine almost killed them, despite receiving Byzantine aid from Cyprus. 9 months into the siege, a betrayal occurred among the Muslims, telling the enemies about the weaknesses in the city walls, so the Crusaders invaded it, shed blood, and committed brutal murders by killing innocent civilians. Antioch fell. Its fall caused a reaction from the Emir of Mosul, Kerboga, who headed with his army towards Edessa and besieged the Crusaders for 3 weeks, then lifted the siege and headed to Antioch in an attempt to save it. He arrived 6 days after its fall and besieged it on 8th of June 1098, until the Crusaders were forced to eat the leaves of the trees. But Bohemont's cunning was the decisive factor in this battle. He spread a story among his soldiers that the spear with which Jesus, peace be upon him, was stabbed is located in Antioch. This was confirmed by a vision of one of the monks indicating the location of the holy spear, so they dug and extracted it from the ground. This act lifted the morale of the desperate Crusaders, who then fought the Muslims until they defeated them in a crushing defeat on 28th of June 1098. Bohemond then established the second Crusader state in the region, the state of Antioch. After the fall of Antioch, an epidemic spread in the camp of the Crusaders and killed thousands of them. Among them was Bishop Adema, the representative of the Pope and the head of the campaign. To avoid the epidemic, the soldiers spread and launched raids outside Antioch and headed to a city called Ma'arat al-Nu'man, who had to surrender after some resistance, but the Crusaders did not respect the treaty they had given to its population. They entered the city and raised crosses over the country and plundered it. The murder was brutal and criminal. The number of the dead was estimated at 20,000 men, women, and children, and according to the estimates of the Muslim historian Ibn al-Athir, the number of the dead reached more than 100,000. After 40 days of destruction and crimes in Ma'arat al-Nu'man, the Crusaders returned to Antioch, where differences emerged between the leaders of the campaign, who quarreled over the fate of Antioch, and the hidden intentions were revealed. All of Raymond's efforts to persuade Bohemond to march to Jerusalem had failed. The soldiers had enough and revolted against their leaders, and forced them to march to the Holy Land, which was the main objective of the campaign. They left Antioch in mid-January 1099 and were led by Raymond and Godfrey, while Bohemond remained in his newly established estate. This is how things went in the north, but what about the Fatimids in the south? The Crusade invasion weakened the Seljuk Sultanate and showed the weakness of its rulers. The Fatimids took advantage of these weaknesses and prepared an army and marched from Egypt, commanded by the general Al-Afdal ibn Badr al-Jamali. He entered with the Seljuks in a battle that lasted for 40 days until the Seljuks surrendered and left Jerusalem, leaving it to the Fatimids in 1098. When the news reached the Fatimids that the Seljuks have been defeated by the Crusaders in Antioch, they tried to communicate with them in order to conclude an alliance against the Seljuks. They sent ambassadors to Antioch and expressed their willingness to recognize their rule in the north of the Levant, on a condition that the Fatimids keep Jerusalem while allowing the Crusaders to visit its holy places. They also offered to cooperate with them to fight the Seljuks. However, the response from the Crusaders was firm: no truces or agreements, but only swords and beheadings. The war is coming, and the Crusaders will not retreat until they take Jerusalem. The Crusaders marched south towards their goal and conquered the Levantine cities one by one without facing any resistance. The local princes paid bribes to the Crusader leaders so that their country would not be violated. The Muslim garrison in Jerusalem was led by the Fatimid ruler himself, Iftikhar al-Dawla, who took the necessary precautions before the arrival of the Crusaders, poisoning all the nearby wells, preventing the invaders from benefiting from its water. He also expelled the Christians from the city, fearing that they would sympathize with the people of the faith and Muslims would be vulnerable to betrayal. The plan was to prolong the siege as much as they could until the arrival of a relief force from Egypt. 3.5 years after Pope Urban's sermon in Clermont, on the evening of the 7th of June, the Crusader army reached the walls of Jerusalem and encamped around it. The numbers of the Crusaders were not enough to put a complete siege on a city the size of Jerusalem. They distributed their soldiers as follows: Robert of Normandy along the northern wall, Godfrey and Tancred taking their positions on the western side, and Raymond and his soldiers positioned on the south, while the eastern and southeastern sides were left unguarded. The tactics of Fatimid ruler proved highly effective, as the Crusaders had to travel long miles to secure supplies, considering the wells surrounding Jerusalem were poisoned. Moreover, the Muslim knights would come out every now and then and harass the exhausted Crusaders from the non-besieged side of the city. Rumors spread in the Crusader camp that a rescue force had left Egypt and they should attack and seize the city before the arrival of the relief force. At the dawn of the 6th day of the siege, the Crusaders began to bombard the walls of the holy city, and orders were given to the forces to launch a full-scale attack. The Crusaders, full of passion, attacked the walls. They were repelled from all sides except for the northern region, which achieved a remarkable superiority and defeated the Fatimid army from the outer wall to the inner wall. The Crusaders' lack of the necessary siege tools prevented the completion of this attack, and Muslims were able to repel the attackers out of the city, inflicting heavy casualties on them. After this unsuccessful attack, the Christian leaders waited and unanimously agreed to prepare all the equipment they needed before attacking with all force they could when their equipment becomes completed. They lacked ladders, catapults, and destruction machines, and began to gather wood from areas where trees were abundant. At this time, ships came to the Levant and sat in Jaffa, bringing supplies, food, and weapons, in addition to large quantities of nails, ropes, and locks. Their carpenters and blacksmiths were able to build stairs and catapults, and one of the most important things they made were 2 large wooden towers overlooking the wall. Raymond used a tower in the south, and Tancred used a tower in the north. The morale of the Crusaders has been collapsing after the long period of the siege. They did not expect such fierce resistance and such valiant steadfastness from the Muslims. Therefore, morale had to be raised. On the 8th of July, they declared a complete fast and pilgrimage to the Mount of Olives, where their clergymen gave sermons that inflamed the enthusiasm of the soldiers and stirred their emotions. They made vows to work together in order to liberate Jerusalem. Then one of the monks claimed that he saw Bishop Adama in his dream, giving them the secret key to victory, and that there was no victory over the infidels, according to their claim, until after the entire army roamed around the city before carrying out the attack. Indeed, these tactics succeeded in raising the morale of the soldiers. On the night of the 14th of July, it was decided to start the attack from the south and north. The attackers could not break through the fortified walls, and their attack was not effective enough due to the fortification and defensive tactics prepared by Muslims. The first day ended without any significant change. The next morning, the attack resumed. Godfrey advanced with his huge tower, covered with the skins of flayed animals to protect it from the Greek fire used by Muslims. After a long fight, Godfrey reached the edge of the wall with his giant tower, and the Christians poured into the city walls, while resistance continued in the southern front, led by the Fatimid ruler Iftikhar al-Dawla, where defenders managed to burn the wooden tower of Raymond. With the collapse of the northern front, the Muslim soldiers fled in front of the Crusaders. The Crusader victory rang out, blood was shed, and all kinds of criminality and brutality emerged from the Crusader soldiers, who abused and massacred everyone whom their eyes came across, not differentiating between a child or a woman, a Muslim or a Jew, until the city was flooded with blood, and body parts and heads were spread everywhere. Severed ribs were scattered in every direction, and heads, hands and feet were piled up in the streets. Every Crusade soldier was seen covered in blood from head to toe. Resorting to Al-Aqsa Mosque and places of worship did not prevent the Crusaders from practicing their crimes. They stormed the mosque and continued to kill and abuse tens of thousands of civilians. It was said that only a few Muslims survived this terrible massacre, which was one of the most horrific and barbaric ones, even by standards of that time. Iftikhar al-Dawla and his remaining soldiers sought refuge in David's fortress until they were given safety to leave. So they resorted to Ascalon, and thus the holy city fell on 15th of July, 1099, after a siege that lasted 39 days. 4 years after its launch, the crusade achieved its desired goal, and Jerusalem fell after a series of brutal and barbaric massacres. The Crusaders in the Levant established 4 states: the state of Edessa, the state of Antioch, the state of Tripoli, and the kingdom of Jerusalem. But the war is not over yet. A Fatimid army is marching from Egypt and is determined to restore Jerusalem. So what happened in the Battle of Ascalon? This is our topic for the next episode.